This is our first ADAS lecture. Thank you for joining us. Just going to introduce you tonight to Sandy Morrison. Sandy Morrison is a partner and director of HTA's busy Edinburgh office. HTA specialise in everything good housing, and this talk will focus on urban development, factories, and around biodiverse public spaces, and kind of go through the format of what Sandy thinks makes great housing. So without further ado, I will hand you over to Sandy, who will share his screen and go through the lecture. Thank you again for joining us today.
Thank you very much, Helen. Let me just see if I can share my screen successfully. Thank you very much for asking me and for giving up your time on a Friday night to listen to this talk on what are the key principles of great housing. It's a very good question to be asked quite a lot when people ask you about housing. What they're interested in knowing about is the rules. And people are looking for rules that they think will define that housing is going to be good. And principles, I think, is a much more interesting way of looking at it, because they are the things that you're after, that can allow you that you're aiming for, that you've not necessarily got to. Before I move on to that, I'll just tell you a little bit about myself. This is meant to be me on the left-hand side. I do a lot of drawing. I do a lot of drawing for my job. I'm involved with HTA in the design of all of the projects we do. So I draw a lot for that. And then I also have a little sketchbook, and I draw whenever I can as I go around. The image at the top here is from a planning committee in Dundee. It's actually when we were getting planning for a regeneration scheme that we did at Millamains, north of the Kingsway. The scheme down below that is Phil Dupitis, who I believe is actually now an art student, or was an art student in Dundee, interviewing the excellent David Mack, who we're working on a project with in Edinburgh, which I'll show you. And the bottom right-hand image is our Edinburgh office, which is designed around the kitchen. And we all eat together, and we have a collaborative approach to work, which I'll tell you a little bit about too. So, but first of all, 6 o'clock on a Friday night, let's cut to the chase. There are sort of 4 principles that I'm going to have a go at sort of illustrating. This is the only slide I'll read out, but I will point this out. So the first thing is that it's all about people. Housing is overwhelmed by regulation, and sometimes compliance hinders quality. It's people that we're housing, and the homes we make impact on people's life chances. So it's a very important thing to always remember that it's people that are at the focus. Sustainability, we're all talking about that. We have an ever-increasing population, and we need to create biodiverse environments around technically refined homes. I'll say a bit about that. And then we're trying to, the way that we think we can do that is by using order to allow us to come up with solutions that we can repeat and to avoid the bespoke, in order to make things which would otherwise be very expensive because they were designed as one-offs, much more available to more people. And then finally, a little summary and a little discussion about beauty, not because we particularly think we've cracked it or we know what it is or anything like that, but because we do think it's important. It's obviously important when we're making places that they are beautiful. Forgive me while I drink my Friday night beer at the same time. So this is HTA, so there's about 200 of us. We're in offices in London, Manchester, Bristol and Edinburgh. And the office has been around for about 50 years, 51, I think we are now. And this is from last year when we did posts about our sort of 50 years. And throughout that time, we've been focused on making places that people like to live. We do all the kinds of places that people like to live. We don't build hospitals, we don't build prisons. People do live there, but they don't really want to. So we do everything else. And in the beginning, we became known as community architects. We were Hunt Thompson. And what distinguished a community architect was it was someone who actually went and asked the community what they wanted before he went and built something. And that was enough. That was innovative enough to make you stand out from the architectural crowd. So we were community architects. And then as we've gone through time, what we've realised is that making the nice places that we would like to make requires a lot more than just architecture. You need to have the right landscape, you need to have the right sustainability, you need all those things. So we are now an interdisciplinary organisation with architects, planners, urban designers, graphic designers, sustainability specialists, and landscape architects. So we also want to be a great place to work. You're all training to be architects. I think it's quite hard to be an architect. Quite a lot of people in their job, they're either doing, they do it right or they do it wrong. We're in this sort of interesting world where you're designing things, where sometimes people will like them and sometimes they don't like them. And that's quite a sort of hard thing to take. So working as an architect or as a designer is quite a tricky thing to do. And then obviously the government or the world comes along and throws in the occasional recession, which makes it even harder. So we do want you, when you're working in our organisation, to be having an enjoyable time. At the centre of what we do, or at least what we did, this is a slightly out-of-date photo, as you'll know, because this is the London office, and there's no one in the London office just now. It's gone back into shutdown, and the Edinburgh office is on a reduced capacity. But the idea is to eat together every day. So all of our offices are designed around a kitchen, and we prepare food for people every day. And partly, if you've got graphic designers working with urban designers and landscape designers, then actually you all see the world slightly differently. And whatever you can do to sort of break down those barriers, the better. So we like to eat together every day, and all parts of the organisation do that. We're very keen to encourage as many people as possible to feel comfortable in our organisation and to pursue an inclusive approach to what we do. The picture on the left-hand side is Captain Hannah Graff, who is in the picture speaking to the office about her experiences as the first transgender captain in the British Army. And on the right-hand side is a rooftop cinema screening that we did as part of the London Festival of Architecture. So we want more people to get involved in from all points of view and to help us. We like to keep people fit. So unfortunately, most of the health and wellbeing things are sort of off. We used to do yoga in the office. I'm not doing that just now. We do lots of cycling. We raise money through cycling. That works quite well. And obviously we do lunch as well. We do have this thing that we like to do where we do a thing we call the shakedown in the afternoon, and we've kept the shakedown going even though we're now basically 200 different offices with all these people working at home. So at 3:30 every afternoon, anyone who wants to stops and we do some stretching and some exercise. Try and keep everyone fit. This is a little bit about fundraising. We like to do, we're working with the Stephen Lawrence Trust to raise money to help people who wouldn't otherwise get into architecture and see it as not being for them to get into architecture and other design professions. And sort of the consequence of all of that is you spend quite a lot of time wondering whether people who are working for you or with you are happy. And we do actually survey them, and then there you go, 98% regarded HTA as a good employer. And that's relevant, not really because you sort of pat yourself on the back, but wasn't that good. It's because you're thinking about it. It's because you're thinking about whether everyone working together is working well or not. So you have all these 200 people, and we've decided to design places for people to live in. And you don't need to do that. And you know the design hierarchy. You're trained to be architects, not necessarily designers of residential places. So there are lots of other things that people could design too. So I just thought I'd say a little bit about why I think it's important that we design homes for people. And part of the thinking on that is that you can design a gallery or an airport or whatever, and it's a nice building and it's a nice place to visit and it's a nice experience. But in some ways, it's true to say that it doesn't have quite the same impact on your life that your home has. I mean, your home is literally the place where you retreat from the outside world to sort of recover and to improve things. And it's your space. It belongs to you, whether or not it physically belongs to you. It becomes your space. And from there, you go out into the world. And what we know is that when that doesn't work, the consequences for people are quite severe. So this is a little quote, you can read it yourselves, from a report from Shelter called Chance of a Lifetime, the Impact of Bad Housing on Children's Lives. And we know from all sorts of reports that where housing is bad, people's life chances are impacted badly. Their health is worse, and they get on worse in life. At the other end of the spectrum, the home that you stay in can transform your life in a positive way. So this guy on the right-hand side is a chap called Joe Eichler. Joe Eichler is a bit of a hero of mine. The chap in the middle, incidentally, is John F. Kennedy. Good to get a good American president in today, I thought, into the presentation. But Joe Eichler used to be a financial controller for a company in America that produced butter and eggs. And as it happened in his life, at some point, he found himself living for a short period of time in a house that had been designed by the great American architect Frank Lloyd Wright. He lived in the Bazett house. And he was so moved by the experience of living in a really good house that he decided to give up his job, working in the egg and butter business, and to set up a company that would build homes that he felt had the qualities that the one-off expensive Frank Lloyd Wright house had had. He felt he could bring those qualities to the housing that he could sell sort of to everybody. And you can see this here, some of you may know the case study house programme, so very similar qualities to the sort of case study houses, but not designed as one-offs and not designed a particular family's needs, designed as a product available to more people. And then one of the things I love about the Eichler stuff is, apart from the fact that I like the aesthetic of it, I quite like how the houses are always the backdrop to somebody's life. The images are about how the house sits in the setting and the house in the garden and what people are doing. Although she would do better at digging the hole if she'd put her wellies on. So that's why we think housing is so important, because if you design it well, it can transform your life, and if you design it badly, it will transform your life. So the things that we do, before we get on to just going back to the principles, HTA's projects are often big enough that what we are doing is creating a neighbourhood. And the neighbourhood is kind of made of homes, streets, and some public spaces. In our view, that's what we are trying to make. So we've talked about the home, and if you consider these in the sort of level of privacy, the home is the private space. It's you, your family, your flatmates, whatever. The street and your immediate neighbours are the people that you know. So you recognise the faces, you feel comfortable there, you feel like you're home before you actually cross your own front door. When you're a kid, you get to know the neighbours, you play in the street, these people become your lifelong friends. And actually the public spaces are the places where you don't know so many people, anyone can be there, it's much more public. And in quite a lot of our schemes, it's the public space that becomes the thing that knits it into the wider community. The wider community starts to use the public space that we've created as part of our development, because they don't have their own public spaces created as part of the developments that they're a part of. So consequently, knitting in what we do to other places and to the surroundings is very important to us. So just to move on to the things that we said we'd talk about. So what I wanted to demonstrate was a couple of projects that sort of relate to the human principle. So it underlies everything, but perhaps this next couple of projects illustrate it to an extent. So I'm a relatively unusual architect, I think, in that I left Edinburgh to move to London to work on a job in Dundee. And this project, or this place, which some of you may know, is Ardler to the north of Dundee. And it was designed by celebrated Dundonian architects Baxter, Clark and Paul. And it was housing really for the sort of Timex factory, or related to Timex factory, which is over here. Excuse me, Timex shut in 1993. And by the time we turned up in 98, 4 of these slab blocks had been demolished, and the place was pretty much in decline. Now, that was in spite of it having actually quite a lot of qualities to it. This is an aerial plan of what you've just been looking at. So it's all designed around a big park. You can see we've got lots of football going on here, slab blocks up in the north, and then these very interesting little U-shaped courtyard blocks down to the south. And so the sort of idea of the thing was that you didn't have to interact with the car. So you could, as a pedestrian, walk through here and you never came across the car. It was all safe. It was all great. The cars didn't go through the middle. This was the shops here. There was a little doctor's surgery, the most fantastic community building that you've ever seen, with a sort of sloping floor theatre and all of that. The church is there, and then a couple of schools, because you need to teach Scottish kids these sort of things when they're primary kids. So this is a non-denominational school, non-denominational school, and then a Catholic school as well. And they had a big fence down the middle, which fortunately we were able to take down straight away. And we worked with the local people. I went there and worked with the local people for a year on what we might do about this place that was failing. And the conclusion that we came to really was that the whole place should come down. And in many ways, the density that it was constructed at was inappropriate for the place that it was in. So people would quite like to live in flats in Dundee, but not north of the Kingsway. So we came up with a completely different vision, which was a very suburban vision. And a sort of important point, because I know that some of you are working on a project just now, a sort of residential project just now. You sort of say something with all of the things that you decide to do with space. So in the previous scheme, which was failing, the houses were failing, they had sort of damp problems and the like, and they also had no private space whatsoever. No one had any private space. Everything was communal. And the shift here was the shift to giving everyone really quite large gardens. So it became a place about family housing and gardens. So the families were already there, but they didn't have any private space, and now they did. And we created this network of streets, 2-storey and 3-storey housing around the fantastic facilities that were in the middle of the estate. So architecturally, it's a sort of relatively subtle thing to do, because it's 2-storey semi-detached houses. It's not the monuments that were there before, or even the sort of modern urban place that architects and others are familiar with. However, it did deliver the sort of transformation that the people who lived there wanted it to do. And some of the big moves, like putting in these balancing ponds for the suds, really made it quite different from what it was before. And just to say, but it was very human-led. So we turned up, we did a master plan for a year with this group of people here, that's me there in the suit. And this person here is Beck Girvin, and she was the leader of the Ardler steering group, and she worked on it for 10 years with myself and others, and we transformed it. And then when we won an award for it from the great and the good at the end of the 10-year period, and it was all changed, it was Beck who turned up to collect the award, because it was, so whilst you might think, well, is that enough to have done with that place? We created the place that the people wanted. So just moving things on, so that was 20 years ago, but I thought I'd talk about it because it was Dundee. And it shows you how we work with people. So working with people is at the heart of what we do. So this big photo here shows you how these things have sort of moved on, because what you're trying to do now is make sure that you can interact with as many people in as much of the community as you can. And one of the things we've found quite good on that is this thing that we've set up called Assemble and Join, where we bought a CNC machine and we made a pattern book of things you could make, from bird boxes to stools to boxes, and we get people together from the community and we make stuff. So this wee guy here, pleased as punch, he's made his little box that says, I'm going to be a basketball player, and he'll keep his stuff in that, and we've made some sort of relationship with him. More traditional sort of community consultation methods, walking around estates with people, talking about what works and what doesn't. And always trying to keep people sort of at the centre of what you're thinking about. So as a professional and as a designer of places, you might not really be thinking about what it's like to actually live in all of that when it's happening. If you do a 10-year transformation like Ardler has, then it can be a pretty unpleasant experience for people when it's taking place. So this is a scheme we're working on just now in London, a regeneration project, and this is what we've done with the hoardings around the building sites, and they all change, and every new building site has something different on it, and it just makes it a little bit more interesting for people who are living there. than it would be otherwise. This one's got some quite nice art on it. We planted this one up. They didn't all survive, but we gave it a go. And then the local kids came along and made one, and theirs was knocked out of the park, really. So I was going to show you an Edinburgh scheme of a similar sort of number of homes, but about 4 times the density of the sort of suburban development we were looking at in Ardler. So Ardler is 900 homes, and it's about 30 to 50 dwellings per hectare. This is a bit more than that. So this is Edinburgh Park. So I don't know if you know Edinburgh Park at all, but there was a park here created by a business park created by Richard Meyer, or to his master plan, and it's all office buildings here around the central park. It's all based, it's 90s, it's how people thought folk were going to live back in the early 80s, and then they built them in the sort of 90s. So everyone drives, everyone comes by car, parks here, comes into your office building, you can overlook the park, but you probably can't go into it. This is the airport over here, this is the train line to Dundee coming up there. And the bridge is there. So it's right on the edge of town, but it has the benefit of all the jobs. So there's fantastic jobs, fantastic green space already there. We worked on a master plan with Dixon Jones, Sutherland, Hussey, Harris, and Alfred Hall, Monaghan Morris on the office buildings, and Gross Max on the landscape. To make this new southern half of the park next to Hermiston Gate train station. And we did the build to rent and the social housing. So I'll say it's something about the sort of difference between those two, because I know some of you are looking at housing and different tenures just now. The idea of the thing is basically a cross. So the tram runs through the middle of it here in a green corridor. The tram stops just there. And then we built a new street running east-west in this direction. And then there's a big garden. We always like a big garden. I think living next to nature is a very important thing around here. So this office building has now been replaced by the social housing building that we've designed. Some of my sketches, they crop up from time to time, just describing the key moves of the scheme, the central cross, the 4 quarters, a public garden at the middle of it, and a new community created around that. The buildings were pretty big scale. And for yourselves, looking at your schemes that you're going to be doing in Dundee, we definitely recommend looking at local precedents and trying to learn things from the local precedents. So we were going to be making quite big warehouse-type buildings. So we got out and had a look at some Edinburgh warehouses. This one's very near our office. And what we're interested in here, and it relates to the order point that we'll make later on, what we're interested in here is the bay and how the bay can be assembled to make a bigger building. And how the bay itself can be made from smaller components that you can refine and design really well and then repeat. We like that approach. A few sketches. The design quite often starts as sort of early stage sketches to try and communicate the ideas of what we're trying to do. As I said when I was talking about Ardler, every move that you make with the space sort of says something about the development that you're trying to create. So we have a big central garden here and a build-to-rent scheme next to an expensive office park, and we've located the social housing at the end of that, so it has easy access to the park too, and we think that's quite an inclusive sort of move. And then we got to do both sides of the street here, build-to-rent side of the street on this side, and the social housing side of the street on that side there. And then when you develop that up, this is the sort of place that you start to make. Family housing in maisonettes here, a very green environment, bigger, simpler sort of warehouse buildings with the apartments in them, segregated cycleways, and a distinctive thing for Edinburgh Park, nowhere to park your car. It's not seen as a car-dominated place at all, so we're not really allowing for the car. There are multi-storey car parks. If you come here and you want to park, that's where you go. And then again, sort of getting out there and looking for local precedent, you know, that makes your scheme for this place a little bit different than it might be if it wasn't in this place. So this is just around the corner from our office, and it's a lovely little space. And what they did here was there's housing along here, and there's a little footpath that runs between the housing and the garden. So everyone's garden is across a public footpath and away. And the consequence of putting all the private gardens into the public space is this incredibly green and interesting little place right in the middle, overlooked by everybody, and it has a very strong community feel. And we wondered whether we could do something different from that, but picking up on that theme in this new garden that we were going to make that ran down through the middle of our development. So if you think that you have Hermiston Gate train station here, and then you have the office buildings with several thousand people going to work in them, assuming that's what we go back to, you would then create this attractive garden that people could walk through in the morning, and they don't have to walk along the street, and this becomes a nice place to do and to be. And then Grossmax filled this up with very attractive little spaces of different elliptical spaces of different characters, where different things happen. And then we pushed all the balconies out into this space, and we think it can be quite attractive. On the other side of those buildings, just up at first floor level on top of the podium, we have another sort of garden, which is, in this case, is for the residents of the build-to-rent buildings. The change in the material here sort of picked up on the sort of industrial aesthetic that we were pursuing with the red brick exteriors and the white brick to the courtyard. We're very keen to use all the roof space, increasingly in development. Developments are denser, like I say, there's more and more people. How are you going to provide the attractive external spaces that they're after? So we're using the roof spaces as external roof gardens on the social housing here, and then on the build-to-rent housing. The build-to-rent uses all of its top floor space to make an attractive environment for all the residents. It doesn't have penthouses at the top level, it has lounges. So we put a little drone up and had a view to the south, and that's the actual view of the Pentlands that you'll get from that spot. Going back to the woman who wasn't wearing her wellies in the Eichler picture, definitely people growing and planting things is definitely a desire when people are living somewhere. So we used the roof space to make a big greenhouse and raised allotment beds. We're very inspired by the local East Lothian walled gardens and tried to make a space that had something of that quality. So having made, we think, quite nice streets down at ground level and a big garden and used the roofs, you need to make all the apartments fantastic too. So this is sort of the worst of the apartments, because this is a north-facing single aspect, one bed flat. So what we tried to do with that was to push a bay out into the street, overlooking the square, which is just there. And if you've lived in Scotland at all, you'll know that come the summer, the sun comes right round to the north. So when you come home from work, you've got quite a nice space to sit in there. And then the added advantage in this scheme, and it's always worth trying to work with artists or whatever in order to make the environment that you're making richer and more interesting. The added advantage in this scheme is that flat is actually looking out on this David Mack designed Mach 1 building here. So I'll move on to sustainability. My point number 2 and my 4 points. So the population is increasing all the time, and we used to look at sustainability as being a sort of bolt-on thing that you did to buildings, and it's completely changed from that now. It's now all about your attitude to how you're going to design your whole site right from the beginning, and I'll try and illustrate it from this scheme. So this is a project that we did in Greenford in London. We did it from the Edinburgh office. There's a canal here. And the idea was always to make sort of canal side living with build-to-rent accommodation, social housing, and private for sale housing lining the banks of this new place. We work for a big American build-to-rent investor and manager. They manage about 500,000 homes around the world now. And this used to be the GlaxoSmithKline factory here. And it was the Hovis factory on the other side of the canal. And they'd both been closed and were disused, and Greystar bought them both. So then we had the opportunity to design something which was on both sides of the canal and make a sort of canal living experience. It's worth saying that all the housing round about here is all sort of 2-storey suburban semi-detached housing, no major public space or anything like that. And what it had lived with forever was a fence around all of this space here, and no one could ever go through it. It was always closed, it was always locked, it wasn't part of the community, and it would take you about 15 minutes to walk all the way around there. So we were just about to open this up. So what we wanted to do was to create a bridge which would allow you to go diagonally across the site. But at the same time as wanting to create a bridge, which you can see we've started to make here, we didn't want all the stuff that goes along with bridges, like lifts and steps and all of these discriminatory and indeed ugly and requiring maintenance things. So the big sort of number one sustainability move was to take all of the existing buildings which are already on the site, to flatten them and crush them on the site, and to keep the waste material on the site. And what that then allowed you to do was to lift the level of the ground adjacent to the canal to a level that you could cycle or use your pushchair or whatever to get right across the site, and people would walk along the canal side. It gave us the problem that the ground next to the canal was then about 2.5 metres, 3 metres above the level of the canal. And brilliantly, the landscape guys solved this by creating this south-facing amphitheatre. So we took a site which previously hadn't had anyone in it, and the people couldn't walk along the canal or anything, and we provided a south-facing sloping space right next to the water. And connected to that square up above. So this is it, we've built it now, and these are the steps, and it steps down. This is the water here, and you can see that if you're going across the bridge, you just come straight over there. And it started to become a very popular place, and this is sort of my point about the development, the public space being something which is actually relevant to the wider neighbourhood. It's not just about the thing that we are doing. So these people don't live in our development, they are just here using the space. And it's very accessible, and it's very green, and we want to create a biodiverse landscape. It's got dancing fountains and all the things that encourage people to come. So just now we've only built one building. It's a big building. It's got 379 flats in it, this one here. But when we're finished, there'll be 2,000 homes around here. So it will be very busy and very dense. So getting the landscape in early and making it great is very important. Some nice shots of landscape and the sort of place we're trying to make. We were deliberately trying to make somewhere that didn't feel like the sort of hard landscape square that you might have encountered in a development like this a while ago. The second big move from a sustainability point of view is to sort out your energy strategy. So the energy in this case is in a big 30 metre by 30 metre, 6 metre high deep box, which sits underneath the main square. So it doesn't take up any space on the site. We can do other things with that, and it appears above the ground as these content steel clad boxes which contain the flues that it needs for ventilation and for power. And it, at the time, was the most efficient way of supplying energy to our whole development. Just moving on to the building a bit. This is the landscape. So the sort of third feature, I suppose, is the biodiverse landscape. So sort out the ground conditions properly, get the power right, make a biodiverse landscape. And then just a few shots inside the building. This is like you're going on a bit of a tour. So this is what they would do to you. They take you up to the roof. They show you all the communal spaces that you could rent alongside your flat. You can have a dining room. You can have this. You can get your friends round. There's obviously a gym. There's always a gym. You can see the fantastic views out. And there's a terrace. There you go. We're getting a bit more up to date. Some people turning up in photographs wearing masks. So the big south-facing terrace. So the point of this is, what do you do with the space? You know, everything that you do with space makes a point. So they're not penthouse flats on the top floor. It's space for everybody who lives here. And there's a cinema room, which has actually become quite popular in the sort of COVID era. People use these to do presentations like the one I'm doing just now, so that they're not just doing everything from their home. And then green courtyard spaces that are open to the west with barbecues and stuff like that in them too. Now, the reason we were able to build the building very quickly and the sort of big move that we did was to build it in a factory. So this is a picture of the building under construction, and all of these are individual boxes that were constructed in a factory and brought here and assembled very quickly. And the way that we were able to do that is by having a very organised and regular plan. So the building is about 105 metres long, and the apartments are very repetitive. There are only, I think, 30 types, which might sound like a lot, but it's not. And by making it quite repetitive like that, we were able to use this factory construction system. And everyone still gets a great flat. This is a classic build-to-rent flat. For those of you that are working on residential just now, don't get caught up in too many things that have got horrible little lobbies. You enter in your front door here, it's all open plan, you can see straight through the building and out the other side. Open plan, kitchen, dining, living, and then bedrooms off either side with either an ensuite or a bathroom. That's just a little model of how the top floor works. But that move of making the thing in a factory and not doing it on site and not building a big concrete frame and not bringing everyone to site who had to build it, saved us 26,000 tonnes of CO2, which is a pretty extraordinary saving. That's not all saved in the construction process, actually. That's also saved, there's a saving to come, which is part of that as part of the demolition process. So that point sort of brings us on to point number 3, which is about order. So what we would like to do, so achieving order in design allows us to democratise quality. So all I mean by that is, how can you make something that is more, that is better quality than people expect they could get for the price? And the answer to that is by repetition. So you design it once, you put loads of effort into designing it really well, and then you repeat it. If you have to design everything from scratch, the quality is lower or the cost is higher. It's inevitable. So I'm going to talk a bit about factory manufacture. So this is, so factory manufacture and off-site manufacture sort of sits somewhere on this sliding scale, which people refer to as pre-manufactured value. So at the one end, on the left-hand side here, you've just got some simple components and maybe they were made in a factory. Then you get panels, and then eventually you get to the point where you're making the bathroom and the kitchen or something in a pod. And then you have volumetric modular, which is where you're making whole rooms, which is what we did at Greenford. And then there's a system beyond that, really, which would include the external facade also as a prefabricated element. It's always good to know what something actually looks like. So this is a student housing bedroom being loaded into site in this Apex house at Wembley, which I'm going to show you how we built that. So in here is an entire bedroom. So the bed's in there, the furniture's in there, the pictures on the wall, the carpet's rolled up on the floor, and I'll go down once all the final finishes are done, the bathroom's in, everything is here. And the hall will all be plumbed in. It's for a big building, it's for a tower, but we're also now working on that at the lower scale too. So we're doing 2-storey, 3-storey houses like that. Here's Greenford that you just looked at, and then we're doing some bigger buildings too. There you go, that's a drawing of the same thing. And one of the interesting things about the modular thing, I think, is that it's an answer to a question which is quite often not the question, how should we build the building? It's the answer to other questions like, how do we stop construction from being dangerous? You know, how do we make construction safer? Build things in factories. How do you make people want to work in the construction industry? Well, it's better if you don't have to go and use a chemical toilet on the curbside in the street, you know. So get people into factories making things to higher quality. Obviously, it's quicker, we can reduce the waste because we control it and we're building more projects in the same place so we can use materials more cost effectively and it's more predictable in terms of cost and performance. And one thing that's not in here, but I think is really important coming back to the people point, is that if you build it faster and with far less vehicle movements, it is far less of a negative impact on the neighbourhood that you're working in. So I think that's pretty important. And then the other thing you can do is you can build a prototype. So a year before anyone was moving into Greenford, we'd already been round the apartment that I just described in the little axle, because we'd made one. So we just made one at the factory. And even though you think you spent all the time in the world designing everything beautifully and it's all going to be fantastic, you turn up and you use the actual thing, and then you realise you want to change loads of stuff. So you can change loads of stuff in the prototype, and then not when you get to site. Here's a little, this says it's an example of modular variety. It's not actually, it's actually all the modules we've designed. So the kind of point of this is that you can make lots of different modules, so you're not actually really constrained as a designer, particularly in what you do. However, that shouldn't compete with the idea, which is the idea is to make something really well and repeat it. So don't try and build a modular building that uses all of these in one project. Time for a graph. In this era, we're all spending lots of time looking at graphs, so here's one. And this is about the time that you save in construction if you build the things the way that I'm describing. And you see, in this case of these two comparative projects, we saved about half the time. So, and more importantly, in some ways, for designers, is that all of this time here was the white time, was time that we spent on a construction project which was traditionally designed once it was on site. And quite a lot of that is people just trying to make the thing that you've already designed cheaper. They want to change bits of it, do them differently. They've got a great idea about how to do it differently. The good thing about the off-site manufacturer is once we've designed it, someone builds it in a factory, and then we build the exact thing we told people we were going to do. Much better from a design point of view. I'll go a bit faster, but just to talk through how to build it. I can't speak to students without talking about how to build stuff, so this is how we do it. You make the room in a factory, you bring it along to the site where you've already made a concrete transfer slab and a core to stiffen the building. You lift all the modules up into place on the building, and then using mast climbers, which you've no doubt seen on buildings in Dundee, you then apply the facade. That's quite important because you have to do everything by hand when you're lifting it on the mast climbers, so you can't make the thing out of things which are too heavy. And then you complete it. Here's that graphic as an actual building. So this is the transfer slab and the core in position in February, and then a complete 26-storey building is done 6 months later. So it's a pretty extraordinary speed and benefits. There are all sorts of benefits to that. You can get on and do something else with your life, but also if you're making new neighbourhoods like we are doing, it's much better to be able to do them quicker rather than slower. No one wants to live on a construction site for all that long. We've written a book about this called the Modular Housing Handbook. So if you'd like to get that, please do. A little bit of a problem with it from Scotland's point of view, which is currently it's very English focused, but Scotland has been very far ahead, I think, previously in timber frame and some off-site manufacture for the rigs and stuff. So I think we'll soon be on to that. So the fourth point, which is sort of more like a discussion, really, because I don't really have any sort of, I know what I think I want to do about the first 3 points. The beauty thing is the challenge. So once you've made something which is focused around people and you've tried to do it sustainably and you're building it in factories and you're doing all that worthy stuff, well done. But actually what you're trying to do is make something that people are going to look at and they're going to think, yeah, I really want to live there. And that's important because the places that we love are the places that we're going to have for longer. So just a few sort of slides on that. And a couple of points to make. This is Hannam Hall, which is a scheme we did in Bristol, which was the UK's first zero carbon housing development. So this is zero carbon, but I come back to my sort of point about how you use land and the message that that gives. So Hannam Hall here has a big space in the middle, which would normally be used to park your cars and things like that. And in this development, it isn't. It's used to have a greenhouse. So there's a continuous greenhouse that runs down effectively the central street. And you can see from looking at the picture that the greenhouse is really popular and really well subscribed and loads of people use it. And it becomes the focus of the community that you can come out and do this. And that choice of deciding to have a greenhouse in the middle and not somewhere you park your car is a kind of essential thing to making people love the place that they're in. And I think arguably, even though the building is not necessarily beautiful, the idea is beautiful and the building becomes beautiful as a result, if that makes any sense. And then definitely how you get nature into developments and you work with the nature which is already there. There's a scheme we're doing in Derby, and these houses are right up against trees which were already there. And then we made a great new street through the middle of it. And we filled it up with little shop units, nice little cheap shop units, all sorts of people turned up, the vegan cafe, the florist, etc. And we planted trees right down it and we went to town on the street. The street's made of stone and granite. And these are the things that actually people come to love rather than necessarily standing back from the building and go and think the building's amazing. A little bit more about beautiful streets. That's what we're up for. That's what we'd like to achieve. How close can you be to the green space? There's a recipe, I think, to what people are after, whatever density of development that they're living at. Biophilia, I think, is what we're calling it. That's where we love living next to other living things. We refurbished this building here. We haven't talked about refurb at all. I think, I'm not sure what the project is you're working on, but I think the sort of retro first argument and discussion is a really good one to pursue. What can you do with the things that are already there, and how can you improve them? And then Courtyard Spaces and how we make them green. This is a building that at this sort of density would normally have had a podium. We didn't do a podium, parked the cars on the ground and part of the courtyard space and kept the existing trees. What landscape is in the place that you're working with that you can retain, and how can you design around that? Because really, why is it jumping around? Sorry. So this is a very dense urban environment, but actually to feel like you're living in a forest and there's a little bit of a farm here is a fantastic experience. And then the sort of final point really on that is the potential to make big open spaces which actually relate beyond your own development to your wider neighbourhood and become beautiful places for people to be and that they come to. And then a little bit about, even in big buildings, the balance between variety and repetition, and sort of how you get that right and how you design something which, even though it's big, the way the light plays on the building, you know, you can make these things into beautiful things. And the home, coming right back to the home, sort of where we started and how the person feels in the home and how we make that uplifting and the connection between inside and outside. This is a little scheme that we did just to finish on that almost. This is a little scheme that we did, which won Sunday Times competitions voted for by people for the British Homes Readers Award for the Terrace House of the Future. When we were talking, all sorts of people did all sorts of things. We won it with this very simple little scheme, which is all modular, and we are building some of them. How do you take every single step that you can possibly take within a dwelling to make the thing uplifting? Whether it's got a fantastic ceiling like that or whether it's just apartments like this. Yeah, I'm just going to finish. This is my last little slide. So this sort of brings together some of the things. This is a scheme we did quite a while ago, but it brings together some of the things that I think are important. So obviously you're living in this green park, and it has the sort of continuity and repetition that I'm talking about when I'm talking about order. So the span of all the buildings, even though the buildings are different size, the span is always the same and the roof pitch is the same. And that makes it easier to construct, and that makes it higher quality. And then it talks to the idea of people living attractive and enjoyable lives there by having this 1.5-story high glazed space with a mezzanine. And that sort of, and it's trying to strike a balance between everything being the same so that it's really, really efficient, and everything being sufficiently different to feel characterful and homely and an attractive place to live. And that is where I'll stop. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Sandy, for that. That was really a great lecture, really interesting slides and projects you've gone through. Just kind of opening the floor now to questions. We've gotten a few in, and we had a few earlier today. I'll just start with the first one. If we think on neighbourhood, how do you stand on the idea of self-built communities? Like, I'm not going to attempt to pronounce this, but a place in Germany, it's on the chat, Brabergen. I'm not quite sure. You're going to have to look in the chat for the pronunciation of that, Sandy.
Oh, okay. Well, I mean, we're totally up for self-build communities. So they are tricky to do because they rely on people's ability to come together and do those things themselves. So they've never managed to sort of gain great traction. We've been involved in quite a lot of things which are called custom build, which are quite similar to that. So you get people involved at an early enough stage to be able to influence how their home is put together, but it's not a one-off design. And then you all contribute to making this place. It's a slightly different thing. It's just open to more people. But we love self-build communities. We took the office to Berlin a couple of years ago. I'm not sure what the place is that you're talking about there, but we did go to see some self-build housing to be built in an area where the wall used to be, and it was properly inspiring, just beautiful.
Yeah, definitely. I think also as well, a few questions we've had in have been, it's kind of unavoidable to talk about COVID in regards to housing right now, because that's where we are all pretty much staying, is in our houses. So it's kind of what do you think the future of housing will kind of be now in kind of our COVID era? What do you think will change? Or
I think you can see from what the housing market is doing that people's desire is to be able to access better quality outside space. You know, that is one of the key things folk are moving on to get, I think. So there's that side of things. And then I think the whole sort of working from home idea. So my view on that is that people have always worked from home. You know, students work from home, people study, they do stuff, people always work from home. The thing that's changed is that we've now brought work into our homes, you know. It's not so much home working, it's that you're living in the office. So your environment that you're presenting yourself in, Helen, you know, that's quite important to people. You know, where is the place in my house where I can present myself to the entire rest of the world, to people I've never met, to people who I have to, you know, if it's a job interview or whatever, to people I have to impress. And I think that will make a difference. That is already making a difference to some of the things we're designing now.
Yeah, definitely. Got another question. Why is beauty the last point on the list, and how do you think beauty should be judged?
Yeah, well, so it's the last point on the list because I think it relies on the other things, right? So I think I'm not of the view that there's one approach to beauty and we should all sort of draw what the thing should look like and then go, that's beautiful, and then make it like that. I think the beauty arises out of trying to make it do the things we are talking about. So make it human, make it sustainable, make it ordered. And can you then make it beautiful? That's the challenge, really. There is, you know, beauty. The English government or the Westminster government is on a build better, build beautiful programme. And that seems to me to be largely about a sort of classically based, you know, view of the world. I mean, it's people are not talking about trying to make something great and then trying to make it beautiful. They have an idea of what it should be. You know, it should be symmetrical or something. It's so easy to sort of take something and just go, well, if you do it like that, then it'll be beautiful. And I don't really think that's true, because I think our view of what's beautiful can be shown to have changed over time. And I think your view of what's beautiful comes from your cultural background and all sorts of things. So I think we're better placed to, I think beauty is in there. It's one of the four, but I don't think we don't start out by just saying, well, how do we make this thing beautiful? We start out by making it, you know, human, ordered and sustainable. Mm-hmm. But I could be wrong. I mean, I am very interested. I don't know whether other people are able to talk, but I am very interested in the beauty thing and what people think that is. We did have this guy who told us that beauty, you know, what is beauty? It's the balance of variety and repetition. It's almost a mathematical formula. And I think that applies to quite a lot of things. So we're based in Edinburgh, and if you go and walk along Heriot Row or something like that, the Georgian buildings are almost the same, but not quite the same. You know, the level of difference is as important as the level of repetition. If it all becomes repetitious, it all becomes too fascist. It has to have some difference, and it's the same with, you know, a Fife coastal village. The buildings are very similar, but not quite the same. And I think that is a sort of elusive thing.
Yeah, definitely. Got another question in. Is it possible to achieve zero carbon housing by converting or existing housing stock?
Well, I doubt it. But presumably, if you felt you had zero carbon energy, if you're managing to produce energy that didn't involve any carbon, then all of your problem with the existing stock is the fabric performance is so low, so there's a lot of heat loss. So any energy we're producing, we're losing into the environment. I mean, it is a challenge. It's the housing stock for you guys. I mean, and for, for me too. I'm going to stick around at this for a while. But if you haven't started yet, then what you do about the housing stock is a huge challenge. I mean, when we did the work on Greenford Block 5 and we were examining the energy that we saved by going modular, one of the interesting things was that the embodied energy was not actually that high. The modern standards are so much higher, right? Imagine you wanted to knock down the new town of Edinburgh. Everyone would tell you couldn't do it because the embodied energy is too high. Well, it's not really true. The standards you would build to are so much higher now that you would recover the lost value of the embodied energy in less than 15 years. But
interesting point, definitely. One thing I kind of wanted to ask as well, one thing I think that students might be struggling with in this project is that it's the first time we really have to deal with density, and that's associated with housing. And how do you kind of balance what density would be appropriate in given sites or given projects?
Yeah, well, I would be really interested to know a little bit more about your project actually, and what sort of density and what sort of project you're doing. I mean, it seems to me that you've got, if your site is where I think it is, which is the Seabraes site just at the back of the Perth Road in Dundee, you're handy for the town centre and the train station and all of that. And you have to build at quite a high density, because if you don't, then people will just be building more houses out on the green belt and taking up all of that land. So we sort of owe it to future generations to build at a decent density. What density are you considering building at? Does anybody know?
It's kind of what we determined to be appropriate, I guess. Yeah. It's a kind of our analysis of our area and seeing what we kind of want to do with that in regards to sort of like student housing or mixed housing.
Yeah, I mean, I would say, you want to be 100 dwellings per hectare. Mm-hmm. But then your balancing factor is the scale of the existing neighbour. So how do you do something which is comfortable in its environment, but still quite dense? But you've got to go for density. I mean, that is a place for people to live. What's happening to the older adults population? Where are they all going to live? There's a population of people living longer and longer who would like the amenities of a town, have got time on their hands, are fit, and are currently living in big houses elsewhere. So the option I would, if I was you and I was doing that project, knock out some really big apartments for people who would like to retire from Broughty Ferry and have decided they're going to move back into the middle of, Dundee, but they don't want to live in, the flats we make are tiny, like 70 square metres or something for a 2-bedroom flat. Whereas if you're moving out of Broughty Ferry and you've got your big bookcase and your big sofa and all of that, you need a 120 square metre flat, take the chance to rethink the product that the housing industry supplies. So one of the interesting things working with communities, as we have done, is communities are much more innovative about what they think housing should be than the housing industry is. The developers and suppliers of housing associations and others are very repetitive about the thing they make, whereas actually people are much more open to more different options.
Yeah, it's really, really interesting.
Yeah, we've got a book on that as well, actually. I mentioned that in my little thing. Caroline Dove's book, she's one of my partners, and she's written a book about housing for older people, but, not looking at it in the sheltered housing kind of way, just thinking about, well, how, now that the people are living longer, what sort of housing could we supply for them?
Yeah, how do you find you can influence the thinking of developers in regards to innovation?
Well, the Hannam Hall thing that I've showed you just at the end there, the interesting thing about that, so that's for Barratt, right? So, I mean, some of you probably know what a Barratt, you'll have seen a Barratt development, but they're basically fairly standard boxes. But the thing we did with them was this. And they were encouraged to do that really because it was about the government and the zero carbon housing development. But whilst they said, oh, no one's going to want to buy this, it's all rubbish, no one's interested in sustainability at all. Once they once they built one and people saw them, people loved them, and they sold like hotcakes, and they couldn't build them fast enough. So the tricky thing with the house building market is because we've got a housing shortage in the UK, you can sort of sell anything. So they can carry on selling the other thing. They don't really need to innovate in order to sell. So the government and others need to create the opportunity to, encourage innovation in a different way, because they will all do it differently if they just know the market is there to do it. But if you don't have to do that, you might as well just stick to the tried and tested standard product. The thing that revolutionises stuff like that is the off-site manufacture thing. So if you think you're a house builder and it's now going to take you half as long to move through the development of a site that it used to, you can spot the sort of economic benefits of that. Economics is probably the short answer to the question.
Yeah, definitely. Another question, do you think the impact of like coronavirus will change the typology of the home and housing as a whole?
Well, I don't know if you will all know the Villa Savoye that Corb did outside Paris. So go and have a look at the hall in the Villa Savoye, right? And when you come in your front door, there's a sink sitting there. Like you've come in the front door and the first thing you have to do when you arrive in the house is wash your hands. And I think that's probably because motor cars and other things were dirty. But it's not necessarily, because they were just coming off, when they designed that, they were coming off the back of the Spanish flu in the late, just before 1920. And I think stuff like that could definitely happen. Now that you have to, if you come into our office, you can't get past the front door really without sanitizing your hands and putting a mask on. And if you're coming back into your own home, you probably are washing. Maybe you do start to get, there's a big sink in the hall. Why not? When Eichler designed some of his houses, he made a door from the bathroom into the garden so that the kids could be brought in filthy from the garden and chucked straight into the bath. Rather than all the Sunday supplement pictures that you see of people with their big sliding doors from their kitchen family room out onto the garden, right? You just get the kids running in and out there for a wee while, and that place looks like a farm, So I think you can do all those things differently. I mean, I think the question is back to yourselves. Which things would you incorporate in a house that a house or a flat doesn't have now as a result of your coronavirus experience? What happens when you come back home? What do people do? Wash your hands, be on screen, I mean, you were saying you've had no face-to-face lectures or screen time. I mean, what home do you design for someone who's sort of not really going to go out very much?
Mm-hmm. That's definitely an interesting point. Kind of go through projects as well to ask yourselves these sort of questions. Got one more. Why are more practices not utilising zero carbon housing? Why do you think that's the case?
Well, I think it is moving in that direction. So the REBA has set up the 2030 challenge, and we are signed up to that, and quite a lot of practices are signed up to that. And we are now always encouraging our clients to go down that route. And we aren't quite yet, but I think we soon will be, advising them on what the zero carbon option is, even if they've chosen sort of not to go for it. We'll tell them at every stage, look, this is the zero carbon option. We need to get behind that. We need to start doing that. We are in a position to influence it. And I think more and more practices are coming on board with that. I suspect, mostly we're a big organisation. Mostly organisations are quite small, and it's actually quite a lot of knowledge to take on. It's another layer of stuff you have to design for. I mean, we're fortunate because we have experts in that, and that's what they do every day. They're specialists. but I would imagine most practices are small practices of 1 to 5 people. It's probably quite a lot to swallow. That's probably why it's not happening faster than it is.
Yeah, understandable. Do you think mixed use developments are ideal developments for the future?
Yes, I do. I think it's essential. I think mixed use is what you're after, isn't it? I mean, you know, we did this little scheme in Derby that I showed you some pictures of at the end there, and I mean, it is really mixed use. I mean, people, you know, folk are worried about who's going to turn up. They sort of think, oh, we can't get a Tesco and a Costa and all that. Well, we didn't get a Tesco and a Costa, but we got a vegan cafe and a chiropractor and a gym and a bridal dress and a tattoo artist. You know, loads of people are entrepreneurial and create these sort of, you know, create these little communities. So we now have a little community of all these people living there and all these fantastic things happening on the ground floor. And I think more working from home is going to change how these places are as well. I mean, you could find yourself back in the sort of world of the village, that you can nip down the street to the wee coffee shop and work with your pals and stuff. I mean, it's happening already. You know, my little local pub, which can't open for alcohol, now opens for breakfast. And people who are working from home go down there and sit and chat together and work together and eat breakfast. You know, it all changes quite quickly. But yes, I think mixed use is essential. It's life. You know, we don't want to make places which are just residential and you have to go somewhere else to do the other parts of your life. Yeah,
definitely. I'll just say one more call for any more questions. But everything you've said today has been really helpful in this lecture. It's been recorded and we hope to have uploaded to YouTube or another platform sometime in the future for people to kind of watch and to look back on. But yeah, it's been, thank you for coming, Sandy. It's been really great to hear about these projects and hear more about HTA as a practice. I'm sure this will kind of greatly influence a lot of our projects currently and then more ongoing projects again throughout the year.
Well, thank you very much for having me. Great pleasure to spend a little bit of time talking about what we do, and I'd love to see what you've all done when you've done it.
Yeah, we'll definitely show you what we've been up to.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
Thank you as well.
Okay.
Goodbye, everyone.
Bye.